Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked into the federal courthouse that Tuesday morning with fire in her eyes and a briefcase full of evidence that would shake the foundations of the judicial system. What unfolded next left Judge Andrew H. Stone's utterly speechless and may have exposed the biggest judicial scandal of the decade. Crockett, a 43-year-old civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, had been locked in a bitter battle with a 67-year-old federal judge for months over voting rights violations in Texas. Observers anticipated a routine hearing, but no one expected her to drop a bombshell that would humiliate Stones on national television. The courtroom atmosphere was electric. Camera crews from major news networks filled the gallery. Civil rights activists sat in the front rows wearing voting rights slogans on their shirts, and legal observers stood ready to document what they thought would be another example of judicial overreach. Judge Stone swept into the courtroom at precisely 9 a.m., his black robes billowing like a cape, exuding the arrogance of a man who had never truly been challenged in his decades on the bench. He glanced at Crockett with casual dismissal, confident she would fold under his usual intimidation tactics. What he didn't know was that she had been building a case against him that would not only challenge the voting rights law at hand, but also threaten to bring down his entire career. Crockett's preparation was meticulous. Her suit was pressed, her papers perfectly organized, and her composure carried the weight of someone who knew she held the winning hand. For months, she had been quietly gathering evidence, not just legal arguments against voter suppression, but proof of judicial corruption at the highest levels. She had recordings, documents, and insider accounts of backroom deals that tied Stones directly to partisan operatives. This was not just about stopping a Texas law designed to close polling stations in minority communities while protecting suburban ones. This was about exposing a corrupt judge who had been using his position to tilt democracy itself. Stones, long known for belittling women and minority attorneys, believed his courtroom was his kingdom and that no one, not even a congresswoman, could challenge his authority. But Crockett was no ordinary opponent. A former public defender who had fought tirelessly for the voiceless, she had built her career on facts, evidence, and holding the powerful accountable. Her work dismantling gerrymandering schemes, voter ID restrictions, and polling closures had already earned her respect in the civil rights movement. This time, however, the stakes were national. With midterm elections approaching, voting rights cases like this were at the heart of the political battlefield, and Stones had become a key figure upholding laws critics said were designed to suppress minority turnout. Behind the scenes, Crockett's team had been investigating Stones for more than a year. They tracked suspicious rulings, analyzed phone records, and followed political money trails. The turning point came 3 months earlier when a disgruntled operative stepped forward with recordings and documents directly tying Stones to partisan efforts to restrict voting. The evidence was overwhelming, but Crockett and her team spent weeks verifying every detail, knowing they had only one chance to strike. On this Tuesday morning, all of it was in her briefcase. She was prepared not only to argue her case, but to expose one of the most explosive judicial corruption scandals in modern history. When she finally rose to deliver her opening statement, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Stones leaned forward, sneering as he drew out her title like an insult, Congresswoman Crockett, his voice dripping with condescension. He clearly thought he could control the narrative, but what was about to happen would prove him disastrously wrong. Judge Stone's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Has no place in my courtroom. We deal with law here, not campaign speeches." The gallery stirred, reporters lifting their heads from notebooks as tension rippled through the air. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, sitting poised in her navy suit with her briefcase neatly open on the attorney's table, didn't flinch. She had expected this exact kind of arrogance. "Your Honor," she replied with calm precision, "I'm here to present legal arguments supported by constitutional precedent and documented evidence of voting rights violations. I believe that's exactly what this court is designed to address." Stones leaned back, a smirk crawling across his face. Lawyers in the gallery exchanged weary glances. They had seen this performance before. For decades, Stones had relied on intimidation. The sneering tone, the dismissive gestures, the veiled threats about careers. He especially relished belittling women and minority attorneys. And the pattern was so well known that even the young clerks whispered about it in nervous tones. Civil rights lawyers clenched their jaws, remembering their own humiliations at his bench. Reporters quietly raised their phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. With theatrical precision, Stones adjusted his glasses. Evidence, he scoffed, his laugh echoing against the marble walls. From what I've seen in your filings, Congresswoman, you're relying on emotional appeals and political talking points, not precedent. Are you sure you're ready for a real legal argument, or should we reschedule so you can bring a more experienced attorney? The insult was sharp, calculated to rattle her in front of cameras. But what he didn't know was that every sneer, every demeaning word was being documented by Crockett's team as part of a growing misconduct file. His bullying, once just courtroom lore, was about to become evidence. The gallery held its breath as Crockett calmly set down her pen and fixed her gaze on him. Your Honor, I've been practicing civil rights law for over 15 years. I've argued in federal courts across the country. I'm fully prepared. If this court is prepared to listen. Her tone was even, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Behind her composure, she ran through the arsenal she had prepared. Recordings, emails, witness statements, all meticulously cataloged. Her senior advisor in the front row gave a subtle nod, the signal. The time for sparring was over. It was time to strike. Oh, I'll listen, Stone sneered, voice dripping with arrogance. But your track record in this court doesn't inspire confidence. Your previous filings have been less than persuasive. He was referring to earlier dismissals, not realizing they had been tactical sacrifices. Crockett's team had used those cases to study him, to map his bias, and to collect intelligence. Now, the trap was closing. Court reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked into readiness, and activists pulled out their phones. Crockett opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Your Honor, before we proceed, I must address this court's ability to render an impartial decision. Stones raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? Crockett's voice cut clean. I'm questioning this court's impartiality, and I have documentation to support that concern. A chill fell over the courtroom. Stone's face darkened. Congresswoman Crockett, I strongly advise you to reconsider. Accusations against sitting judges are serious matters. But Crockett did not flinch. She lifted a document high, enough for the press to see. I have here a record of communications between this court and political operatives regarding pending voting rights cases, including this one. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Stones gripped his chair so tightly his knuckles blanched. That's enough, he barked. I will not tolerate baseless accusations. Bailiff, these aren't baseless, Crockett interrupted, her voice growing stronger. I have emails, phone records, and sworn statements documenting your coordination with political interests. I have evidence of predetermined outcomes and strategies to suppress minority voting rights. Stone shot to his feet, face burning crimson. You are dangerously close to contempt, Congresswoman, he thundered. Crockett met his glare without blinking. The legal issue before this court, Your Honor, is whether you can render an impartial decision when you've already coordinated with political operatives to fix the outcome. The gallery buzzed like a live wire. Stones jabbed a trembling finger at her. You are out of line, he roared. But Crockett only smiled, a cold, deliberate smile she had rehearsed for months. Your Honor, would you like me to read these communications aloud or address them privately first? The silence was suffocating. Stones faltered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Crockett reached into her briefcase again, this time pulling out a tablet. The camera zoomed as she tapped the screen. On March 15th, at 3:47 p.m., you received a call from Marcus Thompson, Chief of Staff to the Texas Secretary of State. The call lasted 11 minutes and 37 seconds. Would you like me to play the recording? Stone's face went pale. That's impossible, he stammered. Judicial communications are privileged. Crockett's reply was sharp as glass. Not when they involve coordinating with operatives to suppress votes. Not when they involve promises about how you'll rule. And certainly not when you vow to take care of the Crockett problem. Gasps shook the gallery. Reporters fired off breaking alerts. Stone's authority melted into visible fear. Crockett pulled out a thick stack of papers. Here are printouts of text messages between your personal phone and political allies. 18 months worth. Messages where you share confidential details, discuss rulings in advance, and coordinate timing for political advantage. Stones croaked. This is highly irregular. These should have been presented through proper channels. Crockett's voice rang like a hammer. You mean the channels where corrupt judges protect each other? Where complaints vanish and whistleblowers are silenced? Those channels, Your Honor? Stones tried one last time to assert control. Congresswoman, I'm ordering you to... You're not ordering me to do anything. Crockett thundered, her voice echoing off the marble walls. You forfeited that right the moment you turned this courtroom into a political machine. The gallery erupted in applause. Civil rights activists stood, fists raised. Reporters' cameras flashed like lightning. In that moment, everyone knew they were witnessing history. The fall of a judge who thought he was untouchable, brought down in real time by a congresswoman who came prepared with the receipts to end his career. The courtroom was already tense when Judge Stones declared that campaign speeches had no place in his courtroom, reminding everyone that law, not politics, was a business at hand. The gallery stirred, reporters raised their heads, and the tension became palpable. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, sharp in her navy suit, did not flinch. She had expected this type of disrespect. Calmly, she replied that she was there to present legal arguments supported by constitutional precedent and documented evidence of voting rights violations, precisely what the court was supposed to address. Judge Stones leaned back, smirking. Lawyers in the gallery exchanged glances. They knew this routine. Stones had a reputation for belittling attorneys, especially women or people of color, using intimidation as a weapon. The atmosphere grew heavy. Clerks whispered, and veteran civil rights lawyers clenched their jaws, recalling their own humiliations before this bench. Court officers shifted uneasily while reporters tightened their grips on their phones, ready to document what was becoming a historic moment. With theatrical precision, Stones adjusted his glasses, clearly savoring what he expected to be another easy display of dominance. He mocked Crockett, accusing her of relying on emotional appeals rather than legal precedent, and even suggested she bring in a more experienced attorney. The insult was calculated, intended to humiliate her before cameras. What he didn't realize was that every word was being documented for a future misconduct investigation that could destroy his career. Crockett, unshaken, reminded the judge she had practiced civil rights law for 15 years across federal courts nationwide. Her calm but steely tone made it clear she was prepared for battle. Behind her composure was months of preparation. Recordings, emails, witness statements, all meticulously cataloged and rehearsed in mock trials. With a subtle nod from her legal advisor in the gallery, she knew it was time to move from defense to attack. When she formally questioned the court's impartiality and held up documented proof of inappropriate communications between Stones and political operatives, the courtroom temperature seemed to drop. Attorneys rarely challenged judges so directly, especially in open court. Stones turned red, warning her about serious consequences, but Crockett pressed on, citing emails, phone records, and witness statements that tied in predetermined rulings designed to suppress voting rights. Stones rose to his feet, shouting that she was close to contempt, but Crockett stood firm, insisting the real legal issue was whether the court could be impartial given its collusion with political actors. The tension in the room exploded as the confrontation shattered every norm of courtroom decorum. Reporters and activists leaned in as Crockett pulled out a tablet. She cited a March 15 phone call between Stones and the Texas Secretary of State's Chief of Staff, complete with a recording. Stones's face drained of color. Crockett then presented text messages between him and political operatives, where he discussed pending cases and coordinated rulings for maximum political impact. Stones stammered about irregular procedures, but Crockett cut him off, her voice rising with the weight of years of fighting injustice. She accused him of turning the courtroom into a political operation, and the gallery erupted in applause. The drama peaked when Crockett read aloud an email from Stones's personal account, where he promised to shut her down fast and guaranteed the voting law would be upheld. The judge slumped his chair, gray-faced, his authority evaporating. Crockett demanded his immediate recusal and a formal misconduct investigation. Stones tried one last desperate defense, claiming the evidence was fabricated, but Crockett calmly revealed that every document, call, and text had been independently verified and authenticated. The final blow came when she exposed a financial disclosure violation, an unreported $50,000 consulting fee from the same political group coordinating with his office. Financial fraud meant federal crimes, possible removal, and even prison. Stones had only muttered weak excuses. Broken and powerless after decades of arrogance, as reporters rushed to broadcast the story, social media exploded. Within hours, Crockett exposes corruption, trended nationwide with millions of views. Memes mocked Stones' humiliation. Analysts called it a watershed moment for judicial accountability. And legal scholars predicted it would reshape how judicial misconduct was investigated. Oversight agencies and the Department of Justice launched inquiries, while Stones' political allies scrambled to distance themselves. Law schools announced they would teach this case as an example of judicial misconduct and effective advocacy. Civil rights organizations mobilized to investigate other judges with suspicious records. By the end of the day, Judge Andrew H. Stones, once feared and untouchable, sat disgraced, his career in ruins. And Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman he thought he could intimidate, stood victorious, having exposed corruption so thoroughly that it could no longer be ignored. The confrontation between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Judge Andrew H. Stones didn't just end in one man's downfall. It raised a much larger question. How many other judges were engaging in similar corruption behind the scenes? If one congresswoman could expose this level of misconduct with proper investigation, how many more federal judges were making decisions based on political pressure instead of legal precedent? Within 48 hours, Crockett was being invited onto every major news program in the country, but she was deliberate in her media appearances. Instead of celebrating her personal victory over Judge Stones, she chose to focus on the broader issue of systemic corruption. "This isn't about me versus Judge Stones," she told one interviewer. "This is about a system where too many judges think they can ignore the law and serve political masters instead of the Constitution. What happened in that courtroom should be a wake-up call for every American who cares about justice." Her message resonated across party lines. Even Republicans who oppose her on most issues found themselves praising her for exposing corruption. A conservative senator issued a statement acknowledging, regardless of party affiliation, corruption in our judicial system threatens the foundation of our democracy. Congresswoman Crockett deserves credit for bringing this evidence to light. The legal implications were staggering. Every case Judge Stones had presided over in recent years was now subject to appeal based on judicial misconduct. Hundreds of rulings could potentially be overturned, impacting everything from voting rights to criminal convictions to civil lawsuits. Defense attorneys across Texas immediately began filing motions to have their clients' cases reviewed. Prosecutors scrambled to determine which convictions might be at risk, while civil rights organizations mobilized to identify which voter suppression laws might now be vulnerable to new challenges. The political fallout was equally significant. For Democrats, Crockett's exposure to judicial corruption became a powerful talking point in the broader fight against partisan court packing. Yet it also forced both parties to confront a reality neither could ignore. Judicial corruption was a bipartisan problem that demanded bipartisan solutions. Progressive activists began campaigns to investigate conservative-appointed judges with suspicious records, while conservative legal groups demanded scrutiny of liberal judges who might also be guilty of misconduct. For the first time in decades, the entire federal judiciary found itself under a microscope. The personal and economic impact on Judge Stones was immediate and devastating. His lucrative speaking engagements dried up overnight. Law firms that had paid him for consulting abruptly cut ties. Even his country club membership was suspended. Far more serious, however, was the announcement by the FBI that a formal criminal investigation had been launched. If convicted of judicial corruption, Stones faced not only years in federal prison, but also the loss of his pension. The man who had once prided himself on sending others to prison now faced the very same fate that Crockett's takedown quickly became a case study in how courage, preparation, and undeniable evidence could dismantle even the most entrenched power. Legal advocacy groups adopted her approach as a model for challenging questionable judges and officials. Law schools began teaching courses on judicial accountability, using her case against Stones as a prime example of effective legal advocacy. Young lawyers, particularly women and minorities, drew inspiration from watching someone stand up to a corrupt judge and win. The long-term impact was profound. A message had been sent loud and clear to corrupt officials everywhere. Someone is watching, someone is investigating, and someone is ready to expose you if you abuse your power. The era of unchecked judicial immunity was over, and Jasmine Crockett had fired the first shot. Social media amplified the movement for weeks. Justice for all became a rallying cry. The phrase Crockett effect started trending, used to describe any instance where a powerful official was finally held accountable. What began as one courtroom confrontation had ignited a national demand for judicial reform. The voting rights law that had originally sparked the showdown was immediately put on hold, pending investigation into Stone's misconduct. Similar laws across the country began facing new challenges as attorneys employed Crockett strategies to probe the judges who had upheld them. 3 months later, Judge Andrew H. Stone's announced his retirement from the federal bench, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. He was desperately trying to avoid prosecution by stepping down. It didn't work. 6 months after his retirement, criminal charges were filed against him. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's star only rose higher. She became one of the most sought-after speakers in the nation, her story inspiring a new generation of civil rights lawyers and activists. She had proven that with enough preparation, courage, and evidence, even the most powerful officials could be brought down. The judge who had once mocked and tried to intimidate her was now facing prison time. The voting rights she had fought to protect were being restored, and the corrupt machinery of judicial power, long hidden in the shadows, was being dragged into the light. Yet Crockett knew this was just the beginning. There were more corrupt judges to investigate, more voter suppression laws to challenge, and more powerful interests to expose. She had won a battle, but the war for justice and accountability was far from over, and she welcomed it. Jasmine Crockett had never been interested in winning just one case. She was interested in transforming the entire system. Her dismantling of Judge Stone's had given her the platform, the credibility, and the momentum to do exactly that. The day of the Dallas courtroom confrontation became legend. It was a day a congresswoman brought receipts so devastating they ended a judge's career and sparked a nationwide movement for judicial accountability. It was a day corruption met its match in the form of a fearless advocate who refused to be intimidated. And it was a day America was reminded that no one, not even a federal judge, is above the law when someone has the courage to hold them accountable.